Linda was a self-sacrificing woman who gave up her own life to care for her elderly mother. One day she did a small favor for a sad old man in a restaurant and said a heartfelt prayer for him. But Linda was completely unaware that this simple gesture would change her life forever. If you like this inspiring and amazing story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. They say a cup of coffee is worth 40 years. It was perhaps that evening, in a quiet restaurant corner, that Linda would realize the meaning of this proverb through the most profound experience of her own life. This young woman, who stood firm against the hardships of life, was one of those who worked double shifts to make ends meet. She was drowning in a grueling routine of day after day, repeating the same orders over and over again. But that evening was different. Under the dim lights of the restaurant, Linda noticed an old man at a corner table, whom she saw for the first time. The man was silent. So quiet that his presence was almost tantamount to absence. But Linda felt his presence. Something was different. The man's hands were trembling slightly, his shoulders slumped. A loss, a sadness, perhaps years of life's accumulated pain. As she approached his desk, Linda noticed his tears. She paused for a moment. She was not used to people crying, especially a stranger. For a few seconds she wondered what she should do. What could he be going through? What has broken him so much? She silenced these questions echoing inside her and took a deep breath. "How can I help you?" Linda said, her voice gentle and a little timid. The man barely lifted his head. His wrinkled face seemed to carry the whole story of a lifetime. His eyes were full of tears, but there was such a heavy sorrow in them that he seemed powerless to speak. "Just coffee," he finally said, almost in a whisper. As Linda looked at the weariness in his eyes, she felt a strange heaviness in her own. It was as if a piece of his grief had been transferred to her. "Are you sure? Maybe you need something else," she asked again, hesitantly. But the old man only shook his head from side to side. No, he didn't want anything else. Linda hurried to the kitchen and prepared the coffee. As she put the coffee cup on the tray, she whispered a prayer. "Lord, whatever is alive, give it strength. Lighten this burden." As he put the coffee on the table, their eyes met. His gaze was so deep that Linda realized she was holding her breath. Those eyes. I've never seen eyes so full of sorrow, she thought. She looked at his shoulders. There was an unseen burden there, but it seemed to weigh tons. Linda couldn't understand how much the man was suffering, but at that moment she was filled with the desire to do something for him. As the man slowly drank his coffee and got up, he paused for a moment, turned to Linda and asked how much the coffee was. Linda winced. "Out of the question, sir, it's my treat," she said, smiling. "I hope you feel better." The old man paused for a moment in surprise. His lips moved, but without a word, he bowed his head slightly and left the restaurant with slow steps. Linda prayed again as she looked after him. That evening on her way home, despite her tired steps, she thought of him. When she returned home after a double shift, she found her elderly mother asleep. The bills were piled up on the corner of the table. "Everything is on my shoulders," he thought. "The rent, the bills, my mom. I work long hours and it's still not enough. Why is the burden of life so heavy?" But no matter what, he felt the peace of mind that he had served that coffee that night. A small favor, perhaps, but it had to mean something. Linda closed her eyes as she laid her tired body on the bed. She remembered the old man, the tears and the weight. For a moment, she thought about what her small act of kindness could bring to his life. Maybe a cup of coffee could make a difference in a life, she thought. If you've enjoyed the story so far, I have great news. It's about to get a lot more interesting. The next morning, the restaurant didn't look much different from any other morning. Linda was tired but going about her work at her usual rhythm. Her eyes were tired, but somehow she seemed lost in the flow of life. But when the door of the restaurant opened, the man who walked in would change this ordinary morning completely. He was tall, dressed in a smart suit and wearing a brown coat. He was carrying a black briefcase. The customers of the modest restaurant where Linda worked were not usually dressed so elaborately. For a moment Linda thought she had come here by mistake. As the man quickly swept his eyes around the neighborhood, he walked resolutely towards Linda. As he approached, his gaze fell on the name tag on Linda's lapel. "Hello, Linda," he said in a serious but gentle voice. Linda's heart quickened. Why was such a formal man speaking to her in such a direct way? "How can I help you?" Linda asked a little hesitantly. The man smiled slightly, but there was a weight to it. "Yesterday you offered coffee to an old man here. Is that true?" he said, as if what he was saying meant something important. Linda's mind was immediately filled with complicated thoughts. Is something wrong? Did the man get sick from the coffee? Or is it something worse? She answered quickly, thinking, "Yes, right? I hope there is nothing wrong." The man in the suit shook his head slightly. "Don't worry, no, there's no problem," he said, and added a tone of seriousness to his voice. "I'm that gentleman's lawyer. I need to talk to you about a private matter." Linda suddenly felt nervous. Trying to understand what was happening, she quickly set up a table and seated the lawyer. As they sat down, the man put his briefcase down beside him and took a deep breath. "The old gentleman's name is John," he began. "He owns a lot of property in this town. He also owns real estate in the city. But for many years he has been in a kind of seclusion." Linda was listening intently to what he was saying, but she still had many questions. The man continued, "John lost his wife many years ago. After this loss, his daughter took care of him. But last week, unfortunately, he lost her in a car accident. John is grieving now and his world is completely turned upside down." Linda's heart clenched. "How sad." "I'm really sorry," she whispered. But she still couldn't understand why this story had anything to do with her. The lawyer continued, "John and his family have faced many difficulties in the past. They have been abused by people around them because of their financial situation. Because of this, over the years they have completely stopped trusting people. But his daughter has always supported John through it all and has never left him alone." As Linda listened to the man's account, she felt herself being drawn deeper and deeper into this story. But the lawyer's next sentence caught her completely off guard. "Yesterday John told me about you. He said that you were sincere with him and that you understood his pain. He told me, she was like a daughter to me. He took care of me, he cared about me." Linda's cheeks flushed. I just did a humanitarian thing. Anyone would have done the same," she said shyly, lowering her eyes to the floor. The lawyer continued, ignoring Linda's words, "John has no one else left. His daughter asked me to reorganize his estate before he died. He is giving most of it to charity. But he has also set aside a large sum for you. He says that even that brief conversation with you made him feel understood. At her age and in that pain, that meant a lot to her." Linda suddenly didn't know what to say. She stood there in shock. She felt a buzzing in her ears, as if the entire sound of the restaurant had suddenly been sucked out. "A large sum? For me? This can't be real," she thought. But the lawyer's serious look told him this was no joke. Linda could only nod as the lawyer pulled out his papers and began to explain the technical details of the transfer. But the words didn't quite reach her ears. She thought to herself, can something so simple, a cup of coffee and a few warm words, really touch someone's life that much? Linda sat at the desk trying to digest what the lawyer had said. The amount that would be transferred to her bank account was beyond a dream. How can such a large sum of money be mine? Is this right? Do I deserve it? He thought. His astonishment was slowly giving way to a kind of guilt. "It's too much," Linda said, her voice trembling. I just offered a coffee and showed some courtesy. I don't think I deserve such a big response." The lawyer smiled slightly. "Mr. John gave strict instructions. It is his decision and he thinks you should accept it." Linda paused for a moment, her hands clasped nervously on the table. "I want to speak to him personally," she finally said. "I should at least thank him for such a big favor." The lawyer paused for a moment. "John left here last night," he said. "He has decided to spend the rest of his life in a nursing home. It's a place where his needs will be met and his health will be checked regularly. It's also a place where he can socialize. Rest assured, she will be happy there." Linda nodded bitterly when she heard this information. "Well, can't I visit him to thank him?" she asked. The lawyer shook his head sadly. "Unfortunately, for legal reasons, I cannot share with you where he is staying. However, if you would like me to contact him, I can help you." Linda finally accepted the offer. She thought about the difference the money would make to her life, but she also felt the weight of such a large sum. A short time later, when she checked her bank account, her eyes widened. $100,000 had been deposited into his account. Her heart began to race. It felt as if this much money was suddenly not real. This is too much," he said, turning to the lawyer. "Really, it's unbelievable." The lawyer looked at Linda with a smile. "I told you it was a large sum," he said calmly. Just then the lawyer's phone rang. Seeing John on the screen, the lawyer immediately picked up the phone as if he saw an opportunity. "Mr. John, Linda is here with me," he said. "She wants to talk to you." Linda's heart raced again. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. "Hello, John," she said in a gentle voice. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I really don't know what to say, but that's a lot of money. Why would you do something like that?" John's voice came slowly over the phone, filled with sadness but with a kind of peace. "Linda, it's hard to get a favor in life, especially a sincere favor in these times," he said. "When I was drinking that coffee, I saw a warmth in your gaze that was like my daughter's. I felt that you understood my pain. That meant the world to me. In that moment you brought a light into my darkness." Linda's eyes welled up. There was silence on the phone for a moment. "But something this big. I don't think I really deserve it," she whispered. "Deserve?" said John, his voice suddenly stronger. "You gave me hope in that moment, Linda. Sometimes in life a small gesture is enough to lift a heart. This is my thanks to you. Rest assured. And please keep up the good work." Linda felt a lump in her throat as she heard John's words. "Thank you, John. I will never forget you," she said. John said gently, "I won't forget you either, Linda. Goodbye," and hung up the phone. After hanging up the phone, Linda sat there for a while, her eyes far away. It was hard to believe that her life could change so dramatically in such a short time. But she knew this: one small act of kindness could really change the world. After sharing the last few details of the proceedings, the lawyer smiled at Linda. "It is an honor to help such a sincere person," he said, and left the restaurant. Linda sat at her table and took a deep breath. There was warmth in her heart and a future full of new hope in her mind. John and Linda had crossed paths only for a moment, but that moment had changed both of their lives forever. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe and like the channel. See you in the next story. Stay well.